Hi guys, welcome to COSC100 tutorial 10 exercise number 5, and in this exercise you've got to write 3 short Python programs to solve 3 little problems that we've given you here to work with. So the first program that you'll need to write will need to read in 2 integer values from the user and print out their sum. Then if the 2 values are equal, it'll need to print out double their sum. So if we jump over to the Python window here, I've just created a file called exercise 5. So the first part of this program needs to involve reading in the 2 integer values. So I'm going to call the first value num1, and I'm going to use the input function to first of all prompt the user to enter in a number. So enter number 1, and now remember that the input function returns a string type value. Now ultimately we're going to use these integer values as part of a mathematical operation. So I'm going to convert these to an integer by using Python's int function. So it's one of the type conversion functions that we looked at when we ran through Python back in lecture 19. And we'll repeat that for number 2. So I can go through. Again, I create a second variable called num2, and I'll just update my prompt here to be num2. So here we have num1 and num2. So I'm going to create a new variable called num_sum, and I'm going to make that equal to number1 plus num2. Now, that's achieved the first part of our program, so it reads in the values and it calculates the sum. But if the 2 values are the same, then your program needs to print out double the sum. So in order to implement this piece of functionality, we'll have to use a conditional expression. So recall that a conditional expression begins with the if keyword. So we have num1. If num1 is equal to num2, then we need to double num_sum. So we do this by essentially grabbing num_sum and assigning 2 times whatever num_sum was to that variable. So what's going to happen here is as we go through and execute our code, line 1 and 2 will be executed and it'll take in the user input. It'll calculate the sum of those 2 values. Then if these 2 numbers are equal, we'll then go and calculate what what 2 times num_sum actually is, and it'll assign that value back to num_sum. So essentially this part of the expression will be calculated first, and then we'll carry out the assignment operation. Finally, when we've finished, at the end we need to print our value to the screen, and we can do that just by dropping num_sum in here. So we can go through and test our program. So if we run our program, you can see it's asked for the first number 4, second number 4, and it's printed out 16. If we go and execute our code again here, put 1 and 3 in there, you can see it's printed out 4. So we've implemented the desired functionality for program number 1. The second program reads in 2 integer values, and your program should print the string true if 1 value is negative and 1 value is positive. So we can see that there's going to be there's 2 possible scenarios. Either value 1 will be negative and value 2 will be positive, or value 1 will be positive and value 2 will be negative. So we can start off with the same code that we used in the first program, but again we need a conditional expression. So the first condition we want to test for is if num1 is less than 0 and if num2 is greater than 0. So this is the first branch that we want to check. We want to test. So the program should print the string true if 1 is negative, so 1 is positive and 1 is negative. So we put in a print statement, and we'll print the value true in that case. Otherwise, the other condition that we can meet is if num1 is greater than 0 and num2 is less than 0. And again, we want to print out the same message again. So you can see by implementing these conditional statements, we can use the AND operator to link the conditions together. So this expression will only evaluate to true if both of these sub-expressions also evaluate to true. And as a result, it'll print out the appropriate message to the screen. So if we go and run our program, we can go and test that one. So we can run it, we enter in number 1, we'll make it positive, this one negative, print it out true. If we go and run our program again, make them both positive, you can see it hasn't printed anything out. So we only want it to print out true if one is positive, and one is negative. We can test the other case here where we make the first one negative and the second one positive. You see we get the correct output here. So both of those different scenarios will work. So the final little program that we've got to implement asks us to write a program that reads in a string of text and an integer value from the user. So the program should then display the string of text the number of times given by the integer value. So again, we're going to start with our input here before. So we're going to just remove, there's no need to have num2, and so we ask our program's going to ask the user for the string of text. So we'll create a variable called string of text, and we'll use our input function to read some input from the keyboard, and we'll prompt the user to enter some text. So now we have our string of text that's been collected from the keyboard. There's no need to do any conversion functions, any type conversions here, because we want the output of the output of this function, the input function, will be in the string, be of the string type, and that's what we want to work with. We can then go, and all we need to do is print our number of text, and we can simply multiply that by the number entered. So when we do this, we should get the number printed out, the number of times entered by the user. So if we run our program, we'll enter the text hello. We want that printed out 3 times. You can see that by using the multiplication operator on a string type variable, we get that repetitive, the text repetitively printed out. An alternative arrangement would have been to use a while loop. So while num1 is greater than 0, we can go through, oops, we need a colon here, we can go print string of text. Now remember, when we're working with a while loop, that the condition in the head of the while loop needs to eventually be false in order for the loop to terminate. Otherwise, we'll have an infinite loop. So we need to decrement our number here. So essentially, it'll print out for 3, 2, and 1, and then it won't meet a condition if we type in the same code again. So if we go through and execute this one, we should have a similar result. So our text will be hello. Number 1, we'll enter in 3 times, and you can see we get it printed out 3 times. This time, because we're doing 3 separate print calls, we get the output is printed on 3 separate lines. So again, the problem doesn't specify that it has to be printed out on 3 separate lines. So either approach is appropriate for this problem. So that's all we need to do for exercise number 5. Thanks, guys.